Well, hello from the great state of Oregon. I'm Steve Shultz here for another live episode. This is our third week doing daily live, so we're not sure how long we'll do this. We may do it indefinitely, but this is kind of a need to know sort of a period. So every day there's things we need you to know and you need to know to help stay strong and keep praying and all of that. And this is my sort of hump day. I didn't wear my tie. So I'm still patriotic. You see my flag right here. So listen, we're about to introduce our guest, but before I do, if you look down at the bottom, it says ElijahList.com. We've been doing the Elijahs for 23 years now, putting the prophets together. And almost every day, 365 days a year, we put prophets to Revelation. So you can subscribe to that. But we do want to mention that we do count on your donations to keep this ministry going. And the way you do that is you just went to ElijahList.com, and then at the top of the page, there's a highlighted link that says donate. That would help us a great deal. We would appreciate that. So without further ado, let's bring in our next guest, and his name is Gordon Pennington. How are you, Gordon?
I'm well, Steve. Thank you.
Gordon is in Michigan, and he is going to tell us a lot about the shenanigans that have been going on in Michigan. I'm not going to steal any of his thunder. The few things that I can say that I know off the top of my head is that Gordon was the marketing director for Tommy Hilfiger, and I'm going to let you say other things that you've done so that people kind of know who you are and how you ended up as a poll watcher in Michigan. So take it away.
Well,
Can
thank
you
you,
hear me
Steve. I
there?
think it's important
Yeah.
yes, I can. Thank
Seems
you,
like we have
Steve.
a delay.
Our fellow Americans and citizens. Thank you.
Go ahead. I think we have a
Can you hear me
significant
now?
delay because you're using your cell phone. Yeah, I can hear you. I think there's a big delay. So I'm going to say, take it away, and then I'm going to shut up. Cool.
I can take my earbuds out, and you tell me if this is better. Is that better
Go
for
ahead.
you?
It's probably okay if it helps the delay. That might be okay. I think,
I know
Gordon.
your
I think,
studio.
Gordon. I think the main thing is there's a big delay because of your cell phone. So you know what? Go ahead and put your earpiece back in, at least in one ear, because it was better. It's not the earpiece; it's the delay, the satellite delay.
Understood.
The picture's gone. He's gonna. Now your picture went blank. Is your camera on? There you go.
Yes.
Go for it.
Thank you. I know these are the types of technical issues that we're all dealing with from time to time. But I think the point in having the opportunity to join you today is to awaken our fellow citizens to the challenges that are going on now, especially in this electoral cycle.
Yeah.
As your listeners know, this election has not been certified by any of the states yet. And so it remains to be seen, and ballots are still being counted. And I heard several commentators just in the last 24 hours saying it is a presumptive detail established by the media only and not by any constitutional authority at all that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the apparent uh, presidential and vice presidential winners. So this is not a certainty, and it's a critical time. And I think it's very interesting that they have taken upon themselves to establish an office of the president-elect. This is something that no one has seen before. So
Great.
there's a lot of presumption here, and it's interesting
Mm.
when it comes to what I think has been expressed in the past as a resistance to the notion of hubris or the idea of pride or even narcissism. The very idea of presenting oneself as the presumptive winners when none of this has been certified is a cause of great concern. And it was Joe Biden himself who repeatedly last week said, you must have patience until this is resolved. Well, what exactly was to be resolved? It has not been resolved. And I think any reasonable person looking at the details surrounding this election would agree that we've never seen anything like it. It's very different than the election contentions that Al Gore and George Bush had 20 years ago, this very month, when for what was it, 37 days, it was thought that Al Gore would be the president-elect, and he was not. And this was, it was a very different circumstance because it was about the mechanical adjudication of the famous hanging chads in Florida. And this is very different. We're talking now about not just 1,000 ballots that are subject to differentiation, but we're talking about tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of ballots that are still being adjudicated. And even if there is a recount, Steve, this is not necessarily going to resolve the issue that some of these ballots are fraudulent. So it's not, the recounting has to be something that's done on a more forensic level than anything we've ever seen. And this is a new era. So with the intervention of computer systems and software systems, it leads to all kinds of possibilities. We've been told by the media repeatedly that the Russians had hacked our system, that the Chinese were attempting to do something with regard to election fraud or election interference and influence. And, and now this seems to be, there's a discord and an inconsistency. And some have even suggested a hypocrisy between what we've been warned about and what is now taken for granted. So I think this is a time of critical concern. It does require patience. And I think the posturing of former Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris is, to be honest with you, I think it's dangerous, if not ludicrous.
Well, you know, people that may not have been paying close attention, they may not have seen that vice president set up the office of the vice president elect. They put that seal on it, that presidential looking seal. That's a complete fraud. No one has ever done it. That office does not exist. There is no such office as the office of the president elect. You can't do that, and they just keep the media, Facebook, Twitter, they're all playing together. They're all in bed together, so to speak, trying to make everybody convinced if they can say it loud enough, often enough, fast enough, consistently enough, then we're going to just roll over and accept it, but we're not. Are you able to tell us anything about things you saw or in
Yes,
the
yes, of course. Thank you, Steve. So the backstory for me was I had never been a poll worker. I'd never been a poll observer. I'd never been an election challenger. And when the opportunity came from the Election Integrity Fund to conduct a program whereby they trained citizens of all different backgrounds that come in and learn what it means to be a poll observer or an election challenger. And of course, this is after the polls. This is the election processing. This is where the ballots are received, where the ballots are interpreted or adjudicated. In some cases, they have to be duplicated. And all these processes have significant consideration in how the ballots are processed and how they're handled and managed. And so I took the training. I voted in my local precinct here in Michigan, in the small town where I grew up. And then I got in my car. I'd already gotten my certification. So I drove a little less than 2 hours to downtown Detroit, where I parked my car at Cobo Arena, a very famous venue in downtown Detroit. And then I went downstairs. I received my credentials and wore them on a lanyard. I registered to go on the counting floor, where there were approximately 123 precinct level counting boards, as they call them. These are tables of 5 persons, each with a specific action and responsibility as the ballots come into the building, and then they're processed in a manner that is meant to be very consistent and very visible. So the purpose of being there as a poll challenger is to look for things that are anomalies, problems, issues, concerns of any kind. And of course, to do it respectfully and properly, but to do it, and it's eyes on. This is all voluntary. This is the kind of work the poll workers are paid by the City of Detroit Department of Elections. and they were hired there. And there were approximately, if you look at the people that were secondary, that were backups as well, and there were two shifts, a day shift and a night shift. And so you have 123 plus tables, and then you have 5 persons at each table for each shift, and then a supervisor. And typically, these persons, this will interest your audience, I'm sure, because these are the details that have made this so unusual. They would typically be paid $250 a day per shift. But I'm told, we're still waiting to verify this, that a philanthropy supported by Mark Zuckerberg doubled that. In fact, more than that, they were paid $600 per shift. $600 per shift, and supervisors $700 per shift. So depending on the length of the shift, that might be anywhere from 40 to 75, $80 an hour. And why were they
Crazy.
paid so much more? And why weren't people processing ballots in other cities in Michigan paid equally more? What was that about? And what's the, you might, for example, interpolate that to say that's a bit of a wink and a nod. Thank you very much for your confidence, your services. It's important that you cooperate with us. Infer what you want. I'm here
Yeah.
simply as a fellow citizen, raising these concerns, not for sheer speculation, but because there are so many details. And listen, Steve, there has never been in my lifetime a election outcome, a presidential federal election outcome that has been so widely contested. This isn't just one or two places. These aren't the places you would expect voter fraud, which is not unusual in some cities and places. Chicago's famous for this kind of thing, and they get
Mhm.
away with it. And it's been a concern for many, but it hasn't been looked at closely. And I believe this election cycle merits a forensic level of detail and investigation. And I mean looking at the sources, origins, and fingerprints, and the data sets, and who's managing the software. We have got to look at this if we're going to restore confidence in the election process at all. And that's critical to our democracy. So having gotten my credentials and gone on the floor, I saw what it looked at first to me to be conventional. But as I looked closer, I witnessed firsthand the kinds of processes that were fraudulent, essentially voter fraud in the form of denying poll challengers the opportunity to. And by the way, the other problem with this is we were disallowed from taking cameras in. So how are you going to photograph or videotape or take material evidence from the voting floor? So
Crazy.
eyewitness accounts and comparing data with incident reports, which are then looked at very carefully and then turned into affidavits and then compiled for lawsuits. Uh, this is a critical process, and it's an essential prior, free, and transparent and reliable elections. But what I witnessed there was fraudulent in that I was kept from seeing data. I was physically blocked from seeing things. I was told that I was not welcome to be close to the table. Specific words were used, which I would even submit to you could be code words. And I'll give you an example. I went up to one of the tables a couple of times, and as I got close to the table and wanted to look closely at things, they'd use the word disrespect. And they'd look around the table, and each person amongst the 5 workers, the supervisor wasn't there, and they'd look at each other and say, disrespect, disrespect, and look all around the table. Well, at that point, I could see that there was a certain disruption in process. Something had changed, and you could see that things were not being administrated consistently or transparently. And that is not in accord with the law. And Michigan election law requires that a representative from each of the 2 major parties, that is how it's described, not necessarily Republican or Democrat, but the major parties, must be represented there for the adjudication or looking closely at ballot details, which could be variously interpreted. Some of these were marked. One of the other things I saw consistently were markings on the ballots. There's no way you could establish or differentiate a signature there. There were scratches. Now, does that mean the person signing it had bad handwriting? Possibly. Was illiterate? Possibly. Or that the handwriting was easily forged? Possibly. But these are the kinds of things I'm submitting to you and to other citizens to say, You should be concerned about this, the inconsistencies, and the fact that I also observed names that did not match poll records insofar as we could see these poll records scrolling through electronically. So there are all kinds of problems here, and
Gee.
they merit charges, they merit attention, and of course, we didn't get all the names, or nor did we get satisfaction in having our questions answered. For example, we asked to speak with the IT director there. We were told he was busy and couldn't speak with us. Repeated requests for this were met with nothing. However, one of our persons, one of the people, that is to say, who was there with the Election Integrity Fund as an independent, and people have asked me, Gordon, are you registered as an independent, or do you have a history of voting? I have voted across the board over the years. When I was living in New York City, I think my tendencies were probably more liberal than they were conservative at the time. Over the years, I have become decidedly more informed, and I believe when you think about someone being a conservative, what is it they're conserving? Are they conserving a romanticized vision of the past? No, it's a hard look at the history of ideas and determining which ideas have the most sustainability for human flourishing. And Western civilization paints that picture. Is it perfect? No. Has it been sustained for 2 millennia in a variety of manifestations and nation states and expressions as empires, if you will? Yes. And we've got to learn something from that sustainability in human history. So, for those reasons, I believe that people may see themselves as people who don't want to simply take the risks of a constant social reengineering of the future based on progressivism alone, but want to look back in history and say, what are the ideas that have proven on the hammer and the anvil of history to be sustainable? So those were my
Wow.
motivations. That's why I was there. Those are some of the things I witnessed. And the Detroit Free Press published a piece, an opinion piece by a writer later, saying that what she observed were groups of white males gathered around elderly female poll workers and were
Are
harassing
you
them
serious?
and intimidating them. And of course, listen, it's very important to understand that this is a difficult job. It's difficult for the poll workers, it's difficult for the observers and the challengers, because the job of the challenger is to look at every detail that's going on and to find problems with what the poll workers are doing. And that's why it's thus the description. You're a poll challenger. You're an election challenger for a reason. So I can imagine people are working long hours. It was a very, very testy and challenging environment. And I believe, based on whatever kind of training the poll workers got, and it has come to light now, there's an audio tape, and this needs to be authenticated. But this audio tape, it sounds to me, I've listened to it 3 times, sounds to me like something you could not replicate or falsify. And it was, in fact, a recording of one of the trainers who was preparing poll workers in Detroit for what they were going to be doing, and it instructs them to act fraudulently. And this is information I think has to be recorded and entered as evidence. And I think there are ways now to match voice recordings to the frequency levels. And again, these are forensic levels of detail, but they're necessary, because if this can be entered as evidence and proved, I believe it will simply further confirm the now hundreds, and it's going into the thousands soon, of uh, poll workers who are offering evidence of voter fraud. My point is, this isn't something that's isolated. That could be probably examined and dismissed as something that wouldn't be any voter fraud is a concern. But the level and scope and scale of this is something that is bringing, I think, more and more people on edge with concern for the way this has been conducted and the way it has to be challenged now.
Gordon, do you have a sense of, there's probably things you can't say, but do you have a sense that um, this is all getting to the authorities, to the attorneys on the right side, and that we have a sense that it's going to be acted upon or is being acted upon? Or again, I'm not asking you to tell me anything you can't say, but how do you feel about what it looks like as far as a remedy for this during this time?
Well, Steve, it's a great question. I don't have, no one person has comprehensive knowledge of all of the
Right.
incidences or all the acts of fraud or obfuscation where people have been prevented from providing a close inspection and to be able to observe and challenge these processes. I would submit to you that more and more charges are going to come out because, frankly, some of the people that we have spoken with are afraid. And I believe what we really need, along with everything else we've seen, been trained to operate fraudulently. And there are whistleblowers already that are coming out, but they're afraid. They're afraid of the hostility. They're afraid of the repercussions. Some of them are afraid for their lives. This is a really, these are serious charges. And so I think it's reasonable. These people need protection. These people need to know that they can come forth truthfully and not be afraid. But we're still in the midst of this. People are still gathering information. People are still uh, collecting their wits and their courage to say, "Look, I can't let this go on." And I think you're going to see more and more of it. I think the lawyers has look. We're only at Wednesday. The election was only 6 days ago, Steve. And in the
Right.
process, they're still counting ballots. In Detroit, they were counting ballots nearly all week. So this is still new, still fresh, but the very temerity of the Biden and Harris camp to stand up and claim victory with fireworks and all the fanfare that I think is look, if that's the way it goes, then there ought to be that's cause for whatever celebration or acknowledgement is appropriate. But this has not been settled. This has not been certified, not by a long shot, and there's still votes being counted. And there's still extraordinarily important questions surrounding all of this. So I would say it was not only premature, I would say it was foolish and honestly, uh, I'm shocked that they
Yeah.
would seize that moment and take this kind of presumed authority in the midst of what I believe is a constitutional challenge that is a constitutional crisis. And it's a reasonable one. And I don't think President Trump is acting unreasonably.
Right. Let me ask this. It occurs to me to ask this. In retrospect, if you could do the day over again, and you showed up at the polling place knowing what you know now, or suspicioning what you know, how is it? Would you do something different? Would you insist on a phone, or would they simply not let you in? Is there something that if you knew this was coming that you would do? Would you hide? You probably would have hidden some recording devices, I suppose. But what would you do different, if anything?
Another excellent question. I think uh, what I that we were told people could phones in, especially with any kind of camera apparatus. But I observed people of all kinds with phones, and I didn't see people pulling them out to necessarily take photographs, but I saw people going aside, phone calls. I saw a lot of. The other thing I witnessed was people entering in, registering as I did, and then leaving the premises, leaving the secure hall where the counting was going. This is a large place. It's the size of 2 or 3 football fields. I would guess maybe
Wow.
100,000 square feet, with
Wow.
one entry bay at the end of it, which again one presumes is secure. One presumes that when apparently 38,000 ballots came in the middle of the night about 3:45 a.m. This was all witnessed and it's all been accounted. That is to say, the incident report has been accounted by affidavit. And you have people prepared to provide sworn testimony of what they witnessed. But they were blocked from, many of them were prevented from asking questions, getting closer, asking more about, again, the provenance of these ballots coming in the middle of the night. And of course, according to people that are familiar with the classic symptoms and evidence of voter fraud, this is exactly what happens. Suddenly, ballots start appearing. From where? Were they harvested after 8 p.m.? Because according to Michigan election law, any vote that was taken after 8 p.m. is the cutoff time. So if these votes, which could have been remaindered somewhere else, could have been picked up along the way, it's not hard to game this system. One of the most disturbing things I witnessed firsthand, Steve, is how easy it is to essentially play the shell game and essentially defy the system. Committing voter fraud is not difficult. Nor is it the most heavily fined. There's $1,000 limitation on fine and
Really?
a 2-year maximum sentence. Well, this is the kind of felonious activity that could change the course of a nation. How is it that it seems like it's met with such incidental fines and threat of incarceration? And I don't know. I talked to other people who said, "Have you seen people actually being tried for these kinds of things?" I think there's a sense in which it's seen in an almost ephemeral sense, but this is very serious. And it's very plausible, and it's happening. I witnessed things that were a, a breach of Michigan election law. So,
Can I ask this? If there was if someone said, if the court said, here's the remedy, if someone took it to court they said, of course, I have strong trust in the Lord that He's going to look over this whole election, but from a natural point of view, if the judge, a local judge says, okay, there has to be a recount, isn't it a bit late for the recount in that everything's all in? Would a recount snuff, bring some of this to the light, or is recount would just be recounting the same fraudulent votes?
well, that's exactly the point that I would underscore. What are you recounting? Does a recount actually involve going back and questioning the origin, the provenance, the chain of custody? This was my biggest concern. Amongst many concerns. But I think one of the things that we were told that was later disputed, and we're waiting now for this to be adjudicated as well. But we were told that the software system running this Dominion voting systems software was in fact firewalled from the outside. It wasn't on the cloud. It was not connected to the internet. And then we found a cable, and the cable was photographed. So we want to look more deeply into, and there's a lot more that I could say and probably should not say until
Okay.
it's presented as evidence in court. But there's a lot more to this story and things that were kept from us. This was not transparent. This was not straight up. This was not conducted in an honest and consistent manner. And you really have to look closely at every detail, but especially the chain of custody issues.
Yeah,
We have higher expectations of FedEx, UPS,
yeah,
Amazon, the United States Postal Service in terms of how, if you were sending me a stick of gum, for heaven's sake, you would have a higher degree of expectation on how the tracking system worked, how the barcodes were scanned in and out at every step, and than you have for a ballot. So this is something that there should be a wide and very, very disconcerting outcry amongst American citizens today for a
yeah.
deeper investigation into this whole process is
Wow.
really it's a
Well,
mess and it's ugly.
let me ask this as we kind of our time is almost up. But can you? I mean, you're a person of faith. You hang around with Lance Wallnau and many of the prophetic people. You're on the ground. You're seeing the nitty gritty dirt, and I think it would be, if I was there, it would be hard. It'd be hard to say, now I trust that this is all going to work out. So if there's a silver lining at all of your faith, I don't want to squeeze anything out of you that's not really there. But how do you feel? And of course, we're not talking about only Michigan, but all the states. Some states maybe there may be a better remedy for this, criminal activity as opposed to what happened in Michigan. So I'll just turn that over as we wrap this up. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Steve, I grew up in the Episcopal tradition, and I grew to love the church and its traditions and teaching, and I went through the catechism and I studied, but I never had a deep sense of the Word of God being the Word of truth that comes alive in the heart and mind of an educated believer. And I believe there's absolutely no contradiction between truth is truth, whether it comes to
Uh,
you by the application of faith and a respect for the empirical methods of science. But I
okay,
believe that the truth will come out. It always
okay.
does. History demonstrates this over and over again. But we should desire ardently that the truth come out sooner,
Yeah,
and we have to take a good look at ourselves as a society, as a culture, and say, to what extent have we allowed things to go on in our society that we just took for granted? I'm one of those people that allowed liberty to be something I've taken for granted. Here we are on Veterans Day. How many people paid the ultimate price, made the ultimate sacrifice for us to have the privilege and the right and the responsibility and the stewardship of voting? And that vote should be seen as something sacred, not something that we treat with the kind of pettiness that I think that we've taken it much too casually. I've seen that with my own eyes now. But I believe that I believe people are waking up. Something good is
Mm.
coming out of this as a country. And we need each other. We need to get past politics to look for things that are deeper, better, truer than anything we've accepted from the political establishment. And I think the political establishment's betrayed us. I think that's why there's such grassroots of
Yeah,
affection for Donald Trump, no matter how rough-hewn he is. So many people have come to a different point of view about him now. And in this indeterminate state, in this post-election cycle, it's never been more critical that we arrive at the truth and not simply take the status quo processes for granted. And I'm guilty of that. And I'm glad that I was urged by others to get this training, to go there and be a firsthand witness to something that is a sacred duty and a great honor. And our nation deserves better processes. It deserves the truth. And I don't believe our news media is being fair or transparent at all. I don't think we're having the kind of objective discussions
right.
about these issues that we really need to arrive at some. Not everybody will be satisfied that we've reached the truth, but we should be
Yeah,
satisfied that we've had at least an honest and earnest discussion in pursuit of that. And I don't see that on most of the mainstream media discussions that I'm seeing. I see essentially propaganda, and I see things that really do not engender much confidence in the American public for this system. So I believe there'll be a real awakening. And I pray
that's
that this will
good.
lead to a spiritual awakening that is going to be
Good.
liberating ultimately. We have a passion for liberty. And we have to say we have an organization called Freedom Circles now. And we like to say it's for the love of liberty that we pursue the truth. And I believe that's something that's going to spread further and further. There's a populist groundswell now. Let us hope it
That's good.
continues, and let us hope it's conducted with civility and kindness. But we must pursue the truth. And there's so much more that we could talk about in that regard, Steve.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we may have you back too on that, Gordon. I just want to tell people, I'll say to you and to those listening, I too am one that just took liberty for granted. I thought if anything ever was taken away, it would take decades to go. If you had said, this is what it would look like, they'll tell you you can't be in church. They tell you it can't be in more than 10. You have to be 6 feet apart. They'll tell you you can't sing. They tell you when you vote, if your vote can be trusted. They'll tell you that they've counted accurately. They'll tell you, they'll tell you, they'll tell you. And I took for granted that that would take decades if it ever left us. And we've seen it happen in a 12-month period. All of that. And I'm almost embarrassed, ashamed to admit that I thought that was that possible. I would have said that's not possible. We have to take these things seriously. And, I want to thank you, Gordon, too, because even those of us who are praying, and I know you're a prayer too, those of us who are praying, we have to have the people on the ground. We can't only pray. We have to have the Gordon Penningtons out there finding it out. We have to have the people giving sworn affidavits. We have to have people sneaking in cameras. We really do. That's part of answered prayer. And let me just add to that one more piece. Last night, for some reason, I don't know why it hit me last night, because every once in a while, when the spirit hits, I'll just get this tenderness. Well, it's never hit me like this with President Trump. And all of a sudden, I had this deep compassion for him. And I thought he has been so good for this country. And I think he's tired. And I think all it takes is more encouragement. He'll be back up on his feet, because he gets a little discouraged once in a while. He's right back up. 4 hours of sleep, that's all he needs. He's back. So I just encourage all of those of you to keep your prayers going. We still believe, I strongly, strongly, strongly believe that we are going to reelect Donald Trump before this picture's over. I absolutely do. I've not wavered in that. But that doesn't mean it won't look the opposite along the way. So one last thing before we sign off. This is the one day we've done this, and we're going to have a second show at 2 o'clock Pacific time with Prophet Chris Reed. He's got some new revelation about the state of Pennsylvania and some other things that I haven't heard yet. So I encourage you all to check back in 2.5, 3 hours, or on the replay, get Prophet Chris Reed. He's a very anointed prophet. So Gordon, I want to thank you so much. Maybe when you get some more information, if there's something you are able to share, let me know, and we'll put you back on, and you'll be our man on the ground for what we really need to know. And I appreciate that very much. So thanks so much for coming, Gordon. I appreciate it.
It's a very serious and sobering time for us all. And let us pray we're on the cusp of something that will bring an awakening that reaches a very, very
Yeah.
deep state of healing. And Christ is the healer, and he is the
Yeah.
only sustainable hope for the nations of this world. And our nation is one with our extraordinary history that needs this revitalization. So I think we're very privileged to live in this challenging time.
Yeah, that's a good word. That's a good word of the Lord right there. And so true. And if it's not a revival we need, it's an awakening. A revival revives people that have already known the Lord. An awakening brings brand new people and that have never heard the gospel, and it revives. It's a both end kind of thing. So, well, thank you all again. Thank you again, Gordon. And we'll see many of you in a couple hours at 2 p.m. Pacific. And we'll see you again. Thanks, Gordon.
It's a
We'll
pleasure,
see you
Steve.
again. Bye-bye.